Good afternoon. You're listening to EdNation with Dan and Chris on CastleRockRadio.com. How you doing, Dan?
I'm doing good. I'm already an hour in.
Yeah.
I still got more stuff to talk about.
I caught a little bit of Let's Talk Education. That was an interesting topic today.
It was. I mean, there was actually a couple topics. We talked a little bit about site and market-based pay, and then at the end, we talked a little bit about the high school scheduling piece, which if you want to loop back on that, I mean, there's some other pieces that I have that we could share. I know we had a question from one of our listeners about, surveying and how you're going to know that the schedule is going to work and that kind of stuff that we can dive a little deeper into later in the show if you want to.
Why don't we tackle it right now? Let's talk about, what is it, audience participation, audience input?
Well, this was really exciting. I'm glad we have people listening to us that want to ask us some questions. So here was a specific question. If 6 of 8 must remain due to funding issues, meaning if this current schedule we're running...
6 periods at high school over 8 periods total.
That's correct. So a teacher teaches 6 of those 8 periods total. When will a teacher and parent survey be given? The feedback would be valuable to help understand what is working and what's the biggest challenge are to the new schedule.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely agree with that. The teachers and parents need to be heard. The 40 students that have been surveyed aren't enough to deem the program a success.
Have we done 40 students?
Well, there were students at the beginning of the year, which I clarified was a temperature check. So
Right.
Since that time, in one of our schools, at least one of our schools, we've had a survey that was pretty comprehensive. I think it was close to 1,600 students out of that student body took a survey that asked similar questions to what I asked at the beginning of the year. And the principal got those results and is now using those to decide what tweaks he wants to make for the schedule next year. I think financially, this caller or this listener is accurate. We're going to stay with this schedule for at least one more year. I think building principals are going to need to make some adjustments to that based on what they're hearing. Like one of the pieces we heard from students, and heard it a few times, different places, is around wanting to have more access to teachers during their off periods. Well, that's really difficult if you're teaching an English class and I'm in your English class, and then I have second period off and you're still teaching an English class.
I got another
second
section
period,
of something.
I can't contact you. So how can we set those things up? But those are building to building decisions that principals will make. But let's go. The first piece in here was about surveys. And so a couple things. First of all, we alluded to a teacher survey that's now become concrete that's going to be starting February 6th, the TEL survey.
Sure.
Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Well, it's really not just the state of Colorado, but the TEL survey is actually a national survey that's put out. The state encourages every district to do it. There are some parameters, and we can talk about those, but it's basically an opportunity for the staff in the building to give input on really how the building's running and leadership and things like that. What we've run into the problem in the past, and we hate this excuse, but you do need a certain number of responses to actually validate the survey.
That's right.
I mean, a low number doesn't give you a good sense of it. So we're trying to encourage we're trying to get 100% participation. We want everybody's voice to be heard. If we're going to survey people, let's survey them once, get as much data as we possibly can so that we can do exactly what that person, the listener who wrote in, wants.
Yeah, and there's some good pieces on the TEL survey, what it measures from a individual school perspective: facilities and resources, student learning, community engagement, empowerment, school leadership, professional development, and mentoring are some of the big global pieces that they ask specific questions about.
I mean, if we had surveyed, this happens every 2 years, right?
Correct.
So if we had done this last year, the feedback we were likely going to get from staff is my class sizes are too big.
And in fact, that's what was given 2 years ago. The teachers have reasonable class sizes. In our district, 34.3% of our staff answered in the affirmative on that one. So a third of our teachers thought we had reasonable class sizes.
Which means 2/3 didn't.
Correct. As opposed to almost 2/3 across the state felt they had reasonable class sizes. So that was one of the driving factors around, we got to do something about class sizes.
But yeah, and let's not gloss over that.
Okay.
I mean, 66% of the state felt like their class sizes were okay.
It was
In
actually
Douglas,
59%.
all right, 59%, almost 6 out of 10 people surveyed. But more than 3 out of 10, just a little more than 3 out of 10 agreed with that.
That's correct.
In
And
our
that,
district.
That was a huge outlier in the past TEL survey. So there is great data in here. But again, the last time this was given in our district, there was 49.8% of all of our teachers or all the people eligible to take this actually took this in our buildings.
Yeah.
So what our interest is, and what we've talked about with principals, is we want 100% participation. We also want one person to take one survey one time. So that's another piece.
Secure.
Yeah, we don't want to have one person take multiple surveys. That would not make the data be the best it can be.
No, that's Chicago voting.
Well,
Early and often.
That's how we're going to get the teacher perspective. And I don't know if it's going to get down to the minutia of a specific schedule, but it's going to give a flavor to the building.
Well, what's great about this is
is
we have to get 50% participation just to get the results back. So there's encouragement to get as many people involved as possible. Second, it's building by building. So we can disaggregate based on high school, and this was a scheduling question, but also middle school, elementary school.
Correct.
And principals will actually get data specific to their building that they can truly use with their staff, with their school accountability committee, with their students to move forward in terms of directions that they see globally works for their community, their school.
So, for instance, one of the questions is teachers have sufficient instructional time to meet the needs of students. I know that that's been a swirl around the scheduling that we're doing. And I think now teachers get an opportunity to share exactly what their concerns are, and their building administration can make decisions about instructional time,
right,
as they've already done. I mean,
and
they've
instructional
talked about
time looks different at different levels and different buildings. So it's great that these surveys can be disaggregated because, you know, you're talking about a high school schedule now, which are 90-minute blocks.
Yes.
So, and we don't have
Roughly.
that at elementary. We may have, you know, a balanced literacy block that might be 150 minutes. So that would look completely different than the high school. So the teachers responding in schools with those schedules would have different input than the 90 minutes at the secondary level.
And that's exactly why we can't make a global decision about this is the schedule you're going to run, because each site wants to do it differently.
Yeah.
You know, we've talked about this before. There's 4 things that influence a high school schedule: class time, lunch time, passing time, advisory time. If one of those is bigger than as you move one, you decrease another. So if I am at Douglas County High School and need a little bit more passing time because I have 2 buildings, I'm going to obviously impact instructional time. If I'm at Mountain Vista High School with 2,200 kids, I may need a little more lunchtime to make sure students get their lunch so they're not gulping down their food the last 5 minutes of the period because they had to wait in line for 25 minutes. So student safety in that regards may lend Mountain Vista having a little bit longer lunch period, which obviously is going to impact instructional time. Thunder Ridge High School likes advisory periods. They want to have that one-on-one connection with they call it seminar, that those students have 9th through 12th grade, same teacher. So they're going to have more seminar or advisory time, which will cut into instructional time. Highlands Ranch went the other way.
Right.
They wanted more instructional time, so they said, you know what, we'll do the advisory piece within each specific class, give kids opportunities to meet that teacher as they can in their classroom rather than have this block of time outside of that. So they chose to have no advisory time, which gave them more instructional time. So there's all these questions that I think some of this will be answered. But the bottom line is it's given kids more opportunities in classrooms to take AP courses, to take career and technical.
Because there's more sections.
That's absolutely right. It's also given teachers an opportunity to have lower class sizes, which is important.
Yeah, no, okay. I think we probably
bludgeoned that one to death.
I
Yeah.
don't know if I would have chosen those words, but
surveys. So kids will get an opportunity. Teachers will get an opportunity. In terms of a parent survey, I know Dr. Fagan and Sina Morgan, our assessment person, have been talking about that. I don't know where that is. Maybe you do.
No, but I wanted to throw in that, you know, this isn't something that's unique to Douglas County. There are districts in the surrounding area, certainly the greater Denver area, that's been running this schedule for years with success.
Yes.
I mean, so we certainly know a lot from our colleagues and peers in terms of how to do it well and what to safeguard against. And then nationally, there is such a abundance of scheduling options. I tried to do a little Google search and went on Eric and tried to find some research of people that have actually studied, you know, durations of period at secondary over scheduling and you know, the modified schedules and then doing the AB blocks and then doing, you know, 6 of 7 in one day and just kind of that. And you describe it as a prize fight, you know.
Yeah.
If you've got those 6 of 7 and you're teaching them all in a row, I mean, you're going, what is it? Work out about 5 hours and 45 minutes or something of just continuous
back to back.
I mean, so there's not a lot of research. The only thing I can find is perceptually, if you're in a calendar situation that's meeting the needs of kids and kids are actually enjoying the system, then generally the teaching is more effective.
Well, and I can also say that even in our own district, we've run virtually every single schedule you can. Castleview High School, single block.
Yeah.
Douglas County High School ran the exact same schedule that we're running right now. They ran that for several years. Thunder Ridge High School has run the block schedule before. We've had a straight 7-period day at Chaparral High School. I can tell you this, from schedule to schedule to schedule, there's been no significant difference in the achievement of students, and that's changing instructional times. It's
Right.
changing. I mean, it's doing all that stuff that's happening right now. But the bottom line is this impacted class size. This impacted options for students, both in a positive fashion, and teachers needed to have that 90-minute prep. That's why we went to this
Right.
schedule.
And, one thing that the research is definitive on is, it doesn't matter the schedule. It always still comes down to the quality of the teacher. And, we've got
Absolutely.
quality teachers.
We do.
And they're making whatever they have to work. And I think the other thing to point out before we move on is that, everybody's talking about good economic forecasts, and the governor's alluded to some additional dollars. We're not talking about enough dollars to really change the schedule next year. That's why, we're already saying this is the schedule we're going to be moving forward with.
Well, this was not a one-year decision. This was the culmination of 5 years of cuts at the high school in terms of SBB. I think we calculated $800 less in SBB than at this time in 2007-8. So, our buildings have made significant cuts over time. This was the piece we had to do
Right.
in order to make sure elementary school, middle school could continue to do what they're doing and not take further cuts. So,
Right. And we like the fact that, the economic forecast is favorable as we
Love
move
it.
forward, but we're just not there to really entertain any of these conversations just yet.
no, we're not. And really, in the end, this is a building-to-building discussion, and recognizing that, as you make one decision, you have to make concessions in another area.
You guys were talking a little about site, and when we talk about teacher evaluation, which is site, and we talk about pay, and we certainly talk about career ladders and professional pathways and stuff. I wanted to share something with you. We got a couple of minutes before we go to our first break. So this is Iowa. Governor, his name's Terry Branstad. Governor Terry Branstad wants the Hawkeye State to create a $160 million teacher quality initiative. Now, what this would mean would be raising the starting salary for teachers from 28 to 35, all right, making them competitive, market-based, market value, right, so that they're competitive in the market. Second, they want to provide up to $20,000 for tuition reimbursement for those top teacher candidates. And lastly, they want veteran teachers to be given more opportunity for career advancement.
Sounds pretty similar
It
to what we're trying to put in.
sounds an awful lot like
Pretty
what
similar.
we've got.
So the $20,000 tuition reimbursement, is that by teacher? And, you have a...
Yes,
How does that work?
It's by teacher, but you have to be in the top of your class in terms of receiving grades. And it comes with one stipulation. You have to agree to work in the state for 5 years.
And do they also get to have the discussion about what areas we need as a school district? So I could say, you know what, I know you teach this right now, but here's what I really need in our district. So
Right.
can you get this specific degree?
It doesn't say, but I'm telling you, looking at it, that's probably the only thing they're missing from what we're doing.
Yeah.
So kudos to the Iowa governor who's actually moving forward with an incentive program for teachers to actually get them. This is going to draw people to their states. $20,000 in tuition reimbursement, that's huge.
Right.
Just tell me I have to be at the top of the class. All right, that takes us to our first break. You're listening Dan and Chris on EdNation. This is CastleRockRadio.com.
Is this just fantasy?
Castle Rock Radio, the future of radio.
Hey, welcome back to Let's Talk Education with Dan and Chris. Hey, Chris, I got the district enrollment summary probably a couple weeks ago, but I was looking at these numbers and I wanted to kind of talk through this with you because, as you know, we don't have any bond dollars of significant amount to build another school at this point. We have a couple other projects we're working on that are leveraging the dollars we have to create capacity. But let's talk a little bit about the projections here.
All right. Well, and we got to review just, the history. At points over the past, 20 to 30 years, Douglas County has been the fastest growing district in the nation.
Right.
And we still, even though, Even though over the last 5 years we've had an economic downturn, we still have grown, what, an average of 2,000 students per year?
Right. I think the projection for next year is right at about 1,200 kids is the last number that I saw.
All right.
But
so
you're right, 2,000 kids. I know that when I was a building principal, we were growing some years by 3,800 kids a year. I mean,
Right.
you start building schools for that. Think of trying to house 3,800 kids per year coming into the system.
Right, because on average, we've got about 2,000 at a high school and
Right.
somewhere around maybe 650 at the typical elementary school.
Well, that's why we were building a new high school every 2 years and opening 4 or 5 elementary schools every other year, every year, opening new middle schools. I mean, for a while there, every single year we had lots of new schools coming online.
Sure.
So here's what the projections say. And, I think you got to kind of see the ebb and flow of this. When I look at the elementary totals, the high water mark starting this actual year is 31,789. So currently in our district elementary schools, this is charters included, we have 31,789 students. Next year, it's projected to grow to 32,16. So 32,000.
So right now we're just under 32,000 in
Yep,
elementary,
so it's
and we'll
gonna-
be just over 32,000.
Yeah, it's going to grow by about 400 kids roughly.
Okay.
Okay. And then from there, it starts tailing back down 31.7, 31.3, 31.1, and then 31.
Is that over the next several years?
That's till 2018.
Okay.
So the high water mark for elementary schools in the next, 5 years, 6 years that are reflected on this is 32,000 kids next year.
Right.
2013. Well, you look at the middle school numbers, they start out about 11,000 right now. Next year, 11.4, 11.5, 11.7, 11.7. So they reach their high water mark in 2015 and 16 of about 11.7, 11,700 students. And then they start to tail off. Okay.
Right.
So that has some interesting implications because the other thing that happens is we have so much capacity at our buildings. Kids don't come in these nice, neat little packages where
Even numbers.
yeah, we're not going to bus a kid from the Ponderosa feeder to Seton Highlands Ranch. So they got to go where they got to go, I guess is the way you say that.
Sure.
But the growth, looking at the middle schools, it looks like that bubble comes a couple of years later, which makes sense. If the bubble's at the elementary school next year, then in a couple of years it'll be at the middle school. Then you know the rest of the story. A few years after that, it'll be at the high school. But wait, there's more to that story.
Act now.
And the reason I think there's more to that story is because there's not a lot of opportunities for students in charters or out of district at the high school level that match or exceed the high schools that we have.
Sure.
So the growth is a little different at our high schools. Currently, we have about 16,600 students in our high schools. Next year, projected to go to 17.2, then 17.7, then 18.1, 18.6, 19, and 19.1.
So break it down. That's basically 4,000 kids per grade level going to 5,000 kids per grade level.
It's about 3,500 students over from 2012 to 2018.
Right.
That's right. So when you think about our high schools, we have 2 right now that are very close to capacity, Mountain Vista High School and Chaparral. So what does that look like when we get to 19,000 kids as opposed to 16.6?
And remember, we're accommodating a bubble.
That's right. But the bubble effect doesn't necessarily happen at the high school level is what it looks like. According to projections, it's a steady climb
Right.
of about 500 kids a year from now until 2018. So the challenge at the elementary school is going to be a little different than the challenge at the high school. And mitigating growth. Talk through how are you managing growth at the elementary school? What kind of things do you put into place?
Well, there's some traditional stuff, and I'll tell you, some of them are not well received. I mean, sometimes when there's a kind of a build out around one of the elementary schools, the first thing we do, instead of building a permanent addition to that building or think about building another school, which runs around, at minimum $13 million, is to use portables. Now, parents are always a little questionable. They're not all that attractive, but they really are the most cost-efficient way of dealing with some of this growth.
Well, and I remember, years ago, sitting in meetings about setting boundaries and things like that, the projection people talking about managing 3,600 kids. They talked about the life cycle of a neighborhood,
Right.
where a neighborhood comes in, you build a school in that neighborhood, you plan the building to be a certain level, and then you plan for 120%, knowing that in about 15 years it's going to hit that peak, and then that neighborhood's going to start going back down. And so you still have this elementary school sitting there that's going to be able to take the growth in the neighborhood,
Right.
but you don't have too much elementary school, which is what happens in other districts. They build too many schools, and then they end up closing schools, which
Right.
we have not had to do in Douglas County.
Another thing, and you have a lot of the history because you've been in the district for the last 10 years, but when we do see that build out in a neighborhood where suddenly we have a lot more families that are coming in, and we recognize these families are going to stay there and those kids are going to get older, so we're going to have the enrollments for the next 6 years if they're K-5, and then they're going to move on to elementary, but the parents or to middle school, and those parents are still going to see there, is we've gone to 4-track in a lot of our buildings. Now, if you think about it mathematically, if you've got a capacity of 600 kids in a building, by going to 4-track, you can put in another 25% by having a 4th track that's always on while one is off. So you can go from helping 600 kids in terms of an educational service to 750 students. And that way, it doesn't cost the taxpayer any more additional dollars in terms of construction. There's no need for those bonds. It's a very efficient use of taxpayer dollars. However, I think there are people on both sides of the fence with that 4-track
Well, and I think,
model.
my experience has been that most of that revolves around schedule for a
Right.
family. If I have an elementary school and a middle school student, one's on one schedule, one's on another, that's very difficult. So I know we've tried to manage that in the past.
But could you imagine if we went out and built another school right next to it just to house it, or an addition to that building?
Well, it'd be about a $16 million decision is the new school. And in addition, I have to believe is $3, $4, $5 million.
Certainly to house 150 more kids
Right.
on a traditional schedule. I think that we'd probably take a lot of criticism from the community and from any sort of accountability watchdog for not really thinking this through and spending
Right.
money where those buildings were likely to not be used to capacity in the future.
So we've talked about the elementary school. Now let's move to the middle and high school, because it seems like that wave is going to move up into those places. Currently in our middle schools, we have seats in the majority of our middle schools. The two exceptions would be Rocky Heights, and part of that is that they have 6th graders in that building.
Right.
So they're at or over capacity. I think Mountain Ridge is getting pretty close to that same place. I know Sagewood is probably under capacity built for the building right now, but they have 6th graders in there. That was in anticipation of growth in Pradera and Cobblestone Ranch. But to manage the growth at a middle school is a little bit different challenge than at elementary school. I mean, I think there has been one instance where one of our middle schools way back in the day did the 4-track as they were waiting for a middle school to be built. I think that was Parker Vista. And some of our historians, if you're listening, I was not here, but I think that was the way that they managed the growth until they got both Sierra and Sagewood built out in Parker,
Right.
Was to go to a 4-track piece. I don't know that that would necessarily be a very popular decision, but that may be the reality. And Cimarron's another one that's huge on capacity because of 6th graders being in there.
Well, and that was another way to alleviate the pressure at the elementary schools is, a lot of times a traditional elementary, and this is not to say this is written in stone, but the traditional one generally ends around 5th grade. And 6th grade is generally part of middle school and a middle school concept. But to really help the middle schools, and because we've had these large buildings at elementary as we've gone through growth, we've kept 6th grade at some of our elementaries.
Well, we've done both.
Right.
And we have 6th graders, some currently at the elementary school, some at the middle school. And, Cimarron's a great example. The reason the 6th graders are at Cimarron Middle School was because it was helpful to the elementaries. I mean, one
Right.
was helpful to Frontier Valley, Iron Horse, Pioneer, to have the 6th graders at the middle school. Well, very quickly, that became very popular, and now that building is jammed.
Right.
And so it's going to be a challenge moving forward. So portables are an option, just like we've used in the past. But we may have to look at some different scheduling things in the future, not for next year. So don't panic if you're a parent listening to us right now.
No.
Our schedules are set for next year. We're feeling pretty comfortable, no 4-tracks for next year.
Well, we can't see, and you've got the numbers in front of you. This is kind of where we started, but we can't see any places that it's going to be a dire need.
Right.
But like you said, this next year is going to be the bubble, depending on what the predictions are. Again, we always come back to the economy, but if it does flip around, we have so much land. You got to remember, Douglas County is 900 square miles. There is a lot of space between Parker, between Castle Rock to Highlands Ranch, and then out to the foothills where, the Roxbury community is. We hear occasionally that, they're going to be developing Sterling Ranch.
Sterling Ranch.
Right. So, there's an opportunity for basically so many houses that it would require its own feeder system of elementary schools,
Yes.
plural, and a middle and a high.
Correct. That's correct. That's at least the master plan. I've seen the master plan for that development, and that would be the total build out. Lots of houses. I even want to think that is going to rival Highlands Ranch when fully built out. We're probably not going to realize that in the time that we're in the district, but we obviously have to build the time out. But
all right, we're running to the bottom of the hour, so let's take a break. But let's pick up right where we kind of left off
with high schools. I'd like to talk a little bit about that
because we haven't finished that off. You're listening to EdNation with Dan and Chris on CastleRockRadio.com.
Before you slip into unconsciousness.
How about the Doors to start us off at the end before we slip into unconsciousness? Jim Morrison. So we were talking about enrollment summaries, planning areas, 2013 to 18 projections. We talked about the elementary schools and the middle schools. Elementary schools are going to stay relatively flat. You're going to have a little bubble in the next couple years.
Right.
Really, if we can make it through the next couple years, we're probably going to be in a pretty decent spot capacity-wise.
And these projections are the best forecast.
That's right.
There's a lot of variables that go into this. There's systems, there's experts that look at it.
And that's, in fact, we have a company we outsource this to called Strategic Resources West that does this.
And I think they do it for a lot of districts.
I don't know that, but I do know that these numbers are generally pretty accurate when you start looking at the growth.
Certainly
and all those
next
things.
year.
Yeah. They've been pretty much spot on. Now, there is nuances when you start talking about open enrollment and kids going from one school to another because of enrollment choices. But in terms of the total district number, I think they've been pretty darn close.
And Randy, our producer, let's make sure we get a kickback because we just mentioned their name on air.
Well, they do a good job, and we appreciate it. But, Chris, I wanted to talk about the bubble at high school because that seems like that's going to be the real challenge for us. With buildings at capacity, like I said, Chaparral, Mountain Vista. I think Rock Canyon's approaching 2,000 kids right now, which is their, quote, capacity. Highlands Ranch is getting up there, Thunder Ridge. I know at Castleview, they don't have the F-pod or that wing on there that adds another 400 students. So they're in a building that's built for about 1,600 students. They have portables on the yard, but of course, there's only a certain number of portables you can put at a building.
Right, yeah, sure.
When I was a principal in Oregon, I think at my building at one point we had, 12 classrooms worth of portables, which would have been 6 double-wide portables on my school. That creates a huge situation with the inner workings of a school. You think restrooms, cafeteria, gym space. All those things. When you put those buildings outside, not to mention the security and safety things we've talked about on this. But here's the landscape at the high schools. Currently last year we had 16,091 students in the actual count on 2011. Actual 2012 is 16,668 students. So we grew roughly 600 students this last year. So 570 some odd is the number. But if you look on the projections, 2013, 17.2, 2014, 17.7, 2015, 18.1, and it keeps stepping up about 500 students a year until we get to 2018. That's the last number on here, 19,188. So across 9 high schools, that's an average of over 2,000 kids per school if you do the math. So no bond on the horizon. All right.
And for those of you who not, making that connection immediately, one of the ways that we can afford to create new learning environments, build schools, is to actually go out to our tax base, our taxpayers, and ask them for an increase in taxes in the form of a bond to actually pay for new construction.
That's right. And so doing the math real quickly, 9 into 19 2,000 students is over 2,000 students per building. That would be over the capacity that we currently have. So I know there's been some discussions at other levels about the relationship that we have with charters and doing this, for lack of a better term, I don't know what we're calling it, but it's having a discussion
Call
with
it
the
a
charter.
partnership, yeah.
Well, a targeted charter
Yeah.
where you go in and say, here's where we have growth, here's where we need a school to be built. Do you want to partner with us putting a school in that place? And I think the most two recent schools, Aspen View Academy and American Academy, their second campus, the result of those discussions and that partnership put schools and capacity and seats in places where we needed them.
Alleviate a little pressure at the buildings that the other schools that are in the neighborhoods that are really maxing it out, busting at the seams.
So talk about Aspen View Academy and their location in the Meadows, what that's done for the other 3 elementary schools in the Meadows.
Well, we've got, in the Meadows, we've got Meadowview, we've got Clear Sky, and we've got Soaring Hawk, all of which I think are at about 100%, 100+%
Right.
capacity. And they are still growing. If you go to Clear Sky, they're building houses across the street. Now, we recognize parents want to be able to go to their neighborhood school. Other parents want to have a choice on what school they want. And some parents want all options open to them. We can't afford to build another school. $13, $16 million to put another footprint, another
Right,
building.
I think that's the current footprint. I think that's what it costs.
So, and who knows what the build out will continue to be. If we had a longer range development schedule in there, we might know. But if we can not incur any cost to our taxpayers by truly giving Aspen View
Aspen View
Charter,
correct.
a great place that will actually absorb some of that really high pressure. Clear Sky is packed. It gives all the schools an opportunity to really manage their student learning based on appropriate class sizes within the building's physical limitations to house a certain number of students. It's really a win-win for everyone.
So maybe we need to take a step back too, because maybe some of our listeners don't know about charter school law in the state of Colorado. But as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, the bottom line is that a chartering group can either work with a local school district to have a charter, and they can work together to decide what that looks like. Or if a local does not want to work with them, they can go to the state and be authorized and still have a charter that the state would say, you can put that in this district or district. Wasn't there something that happened up in Steamboat Springs a few years back around a chartering? There was somewhere where the local school board said, we don't want a charter in our district. And they went to the state, and the state
said yes.
Basically said, yes, we authorize that. And they went ahead and did that chartering. And I can't remember the specific case, and I don't know the specific resolution, so maybe that's unfair to talk about.
But we do know the fears that are associated with this, because when you lose control of working with somebody who wants to charter in your district, they can go anywhere they want. And quite honestly, we have to be more strategic.
Well, and Douglas County has a long history of working with charter schools. I mean, that was one of the methods, in addition to 4-track and portables,
Right.
and that Douglas County's employed since forever in terms of working and putting charter schools in places to help handle and mitigate growth.
What we know is not good for kids is to have give away the power to charter to the state, who says yes, and that chartering group comes back and plants a school right next to another school. I mean, that is not a wise move. It's
Right.
not good for either.
So
of
in
the
our
schools.
district, we've chosen to work with them, and the result of that, these 2 charters that we're going to open somewhere next year, probably anyway, now are opening in places where we need a little assistance because they're high growth areas.
Right.
North end of Parker and in the Meadows, those are going to continue to grow. And in fact, they are growing right now.
They are. You're right.
As we speak, I can hear them growing. So I want to shift gears a little bit. I do think that's a challenge that we're going to have in the very near future around the high schools, and what are we going to do with students. Fresh off of the wire, study calls for daily PE classes. So I don't know if you saw this, but there was a study that was recently commissioned that asked how much and how long and what should we be doing around physical education for students. And the federal recommendation that students 6 through 17 get 60 minutes of physical activity a day. Only 49% of Colorado children 5 through 14 reach that threshold. So talk to me a little bit about, I mean, at the high school level, they have opportunities to take PE classes. Certainly not every student is taking 60 minutes of PE a day. But there is opportunities there. I know at some of our elementary schools, they had to make some choices, but I also know that some of our elementary schools infused physical activity into their daily instruction in classrooms. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well,
or not?
You know, I believe there's a lot of research out there that says the physical activity stimulates blood flow, brain activity, and then the time spent dedicated to more concentrated learning in a classroom or whatever environment it should be in is more effective, more beneficial. So the last thing you want to do is eliminate that opportunity. I'll tell you, there's been many schedules set up around, we have state testing and we recognize we have to do it. But when we're doing it, you can pop into an elementary school and you're likely going to see them be very strategic around when those exams are given, followed by a recess break or physical education or something to get them moving and stimulated, especially if it's in the afternoon. So the last thing, I mean, the survey it almost goes under the, the duh category. I mean, yeah, of course.
I think the other thing that was interesting on there is it talked about some other places where kids would get, for lack of a better term, credit for their physical activity. Things like walking, riding a bike to school. I know Brennan Mendes has a walk to school program that tracks the mileage that students are walking and has benefits and things that would influence students wanting to do that. So he's done a great job with that piece. It talked about modifying recess to provide more play equipment. Well, that's a resource issue.
Right.
Does every kid need to have a ball at recess, or, is it enough to play tag or whatever? I was an elementary PE teacher, and one of my duties was recess. I loved recess, but there were kids that did not.
Right.
I mean, I loved recess when I was an adult. I wish we could have recess sometimes.
And nap.
That's right. Nap would be nice too. But, physical activity breaks, walking or bicycling to school, renovating parks, after school physical programs. I mean, the fact of the matter is we have to make choices about how to use time in our schools. And this is important, but there's other things that are important as well.
Yeah.
And so I just thought it was kind of interesting.
And you know what? I'm going to finish at the end of the show with something for you around physical education, but I don't want to give it away just yet.
Oh, don't give it away. How about this headline? Elbert School District closes because of illness. Elbert School District, about an hour and a half northeast of Colorado Springs, down by Kiowa.
Yeah.
So it's almost due east from
About
us.
1,000 kids, 900 or so?
Actually, less than that. 800 of the 200 students 80 of the 200 students in the district stayed home on Tuesday. So Tuesday afternoon, teachers and staff spent hours Tuesday afternoon wiping down tables and chairs, trying to disinfect each classroom. Huge flu outbreak. So they got the rest of the week off. They're going to resume next Tuesday. They've also turned down all the heating units, so it'll drop to a pretty chilly temperature to kill any germs that might be in the air in the ducts. So
Nice.
Elbert School District, I thought that was really interesting. Closed the whole school district because of flu outbreak.
Yeah. And a completely unrelated story, the district's now providing hat and scarves for every teacher.
There you go. There you go.
All right, here, we got one more minute, but I wanted to throw this out. It just seems to me like everyone is suing their state legislature over school funding. Let me give you a couple real quick. Arizona. Court of Appeals said that lawmakers were wrong to deny school funding increases to account for inflation. So they'll be dealing with that. Texas, hundreds of districts filed against the state after the legislature cut $5.4 billion. And here in Colorado, we're still waiting for the state Supreme Court for Lobato versus the state of Colorado, which could mandate increases in K-12 spending by the state, upwards of $2 to $4 billion.
Thanks for saying could.
So
that's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money. So I don't know. I just think, we have hot on coffee cups just because somebody burned themselves.
And when we come back, speaking of that, we can talk about some of the bills that are currently in legislation. You can sing your little song from when you were younger.
I'm just a bill. All right. You're listening to EdNation with Dan and Chris on CastleRockRadio.com. All right, welcome back. You're listening to the last little segment of EdNation with Dan and Chris on CastleRockRadio.com. Hey, when we went to the break, I was throwing out just states suing the state legislature. People within the state suing the legislature because of all the things they've done with cuts and the bills they've made over the last few years. But you've got a few bills in front of you.
Yeah, I got 44 education bills. This is on the bill tracker.
Just in Colorado.
That's right. In Ed News Colorado, you can go in and they have a segment in there called Bill Tracker. And you can go in there and see any bill that has to do anything with education. It has kind of where the current where it currently sits.
And this isn't a complete list. I mean, there's still time for other people to add more.
Oh, that's right. This is like just out of the starting gate.
All right,
So
fire away. What do you got?
We have 44 bills. I won't go through all of them. Maybe at some point we
That'll
will.
be the 2-hour edition.
But I'd
of
like to play
EdNation.
the should this bill become a law game. So I'm going to model for you the first one here, Chris.
All right.
The first one, House Bill 13-1021, improving school attendance is the overall of this bill. This bill requires each school district to monitor school attendance, identify each student who is chronically absent, each student who has a significant number of unexcused absence, and each student who is habitually truant. Then it goes through and talks about what do you need to do to intervene. And so from our district perspective, what I'd like you to do is say, should this bill become a law? And if so, what would the impact
All
be?
right.
That's the next
I'm
step.
doing this based on a very limited amount of information.
So here's the model.
Okay.
So in our district, we have a process called Student Attendance Review Board, SARB, that is used for students that meet these thresholds. So 10% or 10 or more absences per the school year, a significant number of unexcused. We have a process that the school, after monitoring this and trying to alleviate some of these concerns at the school, it gets kicked up to a district attendance board, who then takes steps, including and up to referring them for.
And every district has there's a Colorado law where you get to that 10 missed days and you have to go through this process, and that's for everybody. So go ahead.
You would say this bill should become a law?
Depends. Is there a punchline to this?
There's a lot more information in here. School districts shall initiate court proceedings to enforce school attendance requirements, but only if implementation of the student's multidisciplinary plan is unsuccessful.
So if it doesn't cost anything to us, then attendance is good. I say it should be a law.
Well, it says there's a fiscal impact for this bill.
So then I would say no.
Okay.
Because we have a process already in place to deal with this.
We do.
Yeah.
And quite effectively, we've dealt with this already.
All right.
But it does cost us money. But
so I'm going to go with bogus.
Okay.
Homage to Dom and Jane.
Okay. So here we go. House Bill 13-1047. Under current law, if a school does not offer an activity which the student wishes to participate, the student may participate in the activity at another public school in the student's district of attendance or the student's district of residence. This bill clarifies that officials in the district where a student wants to participate will choose the school. So it's taking this notion of a student being able to say, well, I live in Elizabeth, but I want to participate in such and such a program at Ponderosa High School. My school doesn't offer it, so I want to go to Ponderosa. It really puts that to a district level discussion about where would this student best fit.
We're about creating opportunities for kids. So as long as this doesn't incur obligation around transportation, I'm all for including kids in after-school activities.
Great answer, Chris, because we already have a process by which we let students from outside our district or private school students participate.
So it doesn't need to be a law. We're already doing it.
Correct. Okay, let me find another one here that might fit in. How about this one? You might like this. This is a public school, an interscholastic organization cannot require a student who is enrolled in a non-public home-based educational program, so a homeschool student, to enroll in or complete course credits as a condition of participating in extracurricular activities. So you're homeschooled in our district. You want to participate in softball at Thunder Ridge High School. Right. Should the district be able to say, well, you have to take 2 classes at my...
Well, I don't know if that, right now we already have this homeschool partnership where, homeschool students in our district have to register, so we should already be accounting for them. I would say that's only got to be a need if they're not getting their needs met at home. For example, if the kid's really bright and he's being homeschooled and they don't have anyone to teach AP calculus, and he certainly wants that in terms of being longevity, we should make that available, especially if we've got the seat in the room that they could get into. But making it a condition for after-school activities, I don't think that has to be part of it.
Good answer. One more, then we'll move on to your quick hits. House Bill 13-1151, sales and use tax holiday for higher ed textbooks. Okay? Now think about what we've talked about. We talked about concurrent enrollment, and so it could apply to our district. This bill creates a one-day state sales tax and use tax exemption for any textbook that is required or recommended for use at an institution of higher education and is sold by a campus bookstore. Occurs the last Monday of August for the next 5 years. This exemption applies to new, used electronic textbooks, permits statutory towns, cities, or counties to create identical sales tax holidays.
So let me sum up and tell me if I've got this right. There's one day a year where I can buy a textbook for a class that's tax-free?
That's the last Monday of August.
Love it.
Okay, and what would the implications be for Douglas County?
Well, if we have concurrent enrollment, the kids would have to know and be registered in their classrooms and be able to get those before that date.
Right, so we'd have to have our kids know that this is the day you want to buy this textbook.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right, so we got about 5 minutes left. Let's see if we can get a couple of things in here. So, people who are worried about technology boom, that it would lead to children playing video games in class, turns out they were right. So the fast-paced, globally connected world of digital learning lets educators build new career paths for kids and emerge as leaders. This is what I found so interesting. Ever heard of Angry Birds?
Yes, I have.
All right. Angry Birds is a video game franchise that has become so popular all over the world, it's now being used in the United States by educators to teach math. For it or hate it?
I'm for it because if it engages students, they're going to have a longer term memory and use of that information. So, for instance, if you're talking about trajectory and force and all of those things in a math classroom or in a science classroom, and a kid understands how those things all interplay and they can connect all those and make that little bird hit the stack and knock it down, that's awesome. I think they have to understand the science behind it. It's not just playing the game, but understanding how do those things change over that trajectory piece.
Yeah. All right. So would you believe research shows that children still prefer print books to ebooks in this day and age?
No, I wouldn't believe that.
So children are actually embracing ebooks by the millions, but when surveyed, they say they'd still rather have the print version.
I wonder if that's all about the tactile, the touch, feeling the book.
Could be. I will tell you, though, it has led to more reading, according to this research. And what's especially interesting is that boys are showing more interest in reading for fun because of them.
Because of electronic books?
Yep.
Well, that's great. That's exactly what we want to have happen, isn't it?
So although they still prefer that tactile, the actual textbook or the actual physical book, they're reading more. They're reading more for fun. And it's encouraging boys who generally, aren't as quick to embrace reading at younger ages to do so more.
I wonder if some of that is around the interactiveness of some of those books, if it's just straight book for book.
Well, and we've seen some great applications on some of the media we have where I think one of the demonstration was the picture on the screen was a windmill, and the person reading it could blow onto the screen and it would spin the actual digital wheel.
Right.
I thought that was amazing.
Very amazing.
So, all right, I think we've got just a couple more minutes, so let's see if we can hit some quickly. You ready? So New York City missed the deadline for teacher evaluation.
I saw that.
What does this mean, you ask? Well,
millions of dollars.
We're going to do some math. The state-imposed deadline for having a teacher evaluation plan in place has come and gone, leaving New York City $250 million short in financial aid. On top of that, Governor Andrew Cuomo, he made an $800 million additional state aid contingent on them being done.
So $1 billion.
And, wait, I'm not done. As well as the state's $700 million Race to the Top grant. So, $250 million, $800 million, $700 million.
And so I think I read that article too, and wasn't it that they were the only school district in the state of New York that did not meet that deadline? So they not only affected themselves, but that Race to the Top dollars, that $700 million was for the whole state of New York.
It is, putting it in jeopardy. So when you add it all up, it comes to about $1.75 billion. Do you think that you could have met a deadline for $2 billion?
Well, and I thought that they were almost there. Wasn't the reason they didn't meet the deadline is because of the agreements with their local?
Yeah, and the local just blamed the mayor for torpedoing it because they wanted a 2-year window.
Well, that's a pretty big penalty to pay for
$2 billion.
Yeah.
All right.
Wow.
So, hundreds of people attended an Indiana State House rally to support the legislators' efforts to pull a Common Core. They would like the state board to decide. Interesting fact, no former educators on their state board. All right, we got about a minute. Moody's negative on the higher ed. So Moody Investors Service, it's a company that rates the value of colleges and universities in terms of providing a worthy service, gave them a negative across the board. Not even top-tier research universities are now there. Could you imagine? This is what they're saying. The reason, a growing doubt over the value of a college degree.
I have an article, Dr. Cutter.
Okay,
Millions of graduates hold jobs that don't require a college degree, this report says. We'll hit this next time because it's totally connected to that.
Let me finish with one more, and then we got to go. So research conducted on students in the District of Columbia, D.C., grades 3 through 8 found that among elementary school children, active video games can benefit similar to physical education. Can we replace PE with video games?
Well, don't we have someone that works in our system that just broke their ankle playing Wii?
We do.
That's
And that
right.
takes us to the end of
Right.
EdNation with Dan and Chris. You've been listening to CastleRockRadio.com.
Thank you.
And the way the sunlight plays upon her head.